Imagine you're, I don't know, sitting on the couch after an absolute marathon gaming session. Like you've been playing this simulation game for literal
Oh
decades.
yeah, totally bloodshot eyes, just completely locked in.
Exactly. And you've just achieved the historic ultimate high score. I mean, the screen is flashing, the confetti is falling, the numbers are just through the roof.
Right, you're the undisputed champion of the server. You beat the game.
Yeah. But then, right as you're sitting there basking in the glory, you notice this tiny, unremarkable little menu icon blinking in the bottom corner of the screen.
Uh-oh. That is never a good sign.
No, it really isn't. So
Oh.
you click it, and right before your eyes, you discover this hidden background penalty system that you never even knew it existed,
Oh wow, just running secretly the whole time.
running the entire time. And it instantly wipes out nearly 20% of your hard-earned points. It turns out your incredibly successful winning strategy was actually draining a secret stamina bar the entire time. And now the bill just came due.
That is, well, that's a profoundly unsettling image. Mostly because, in a video game, you can just hit the reset button and try a different build.
Right, you just start a new save file.
Exactly. But in the real world, that stamina bar is our planet. And right now, the most advanced, wealthiest nations on Earth are playing a game where the primary scoreboard says we are winning on just an unprecedented scale. But the hidden metrics, they show we are hurtling toward a catastrophic system failure.
And that, right there, is the exact tension we are exploring today in this deep dive. Because we are looking at the absolute latest growth data for what the United Nations classifies as the very high human development tier, the VHHD countries.
Yeah, it's a very specific, very elite grouping of nations.
Right. And for you listening right now, if you live in or even aspire to live in a highly developed society, places with paved roads, reliable power, modern hospitals, you are living inside this exact data set.
You are the data.
You are the data. This is the ultimate success story of global development over the last 33 years. But today, our mission is to really look under the hood of that success. We need to understand how this prosperity is mechanically built, who is actually getting paid for it, and uncover that massive invisible ecological payday loan we've taken out to fund the entire illusion.
To really set the stage for that hidden penalty, I think we have to look at the peak of the mountain first, like the scoreboard you mentioned. In 2023, these very high human development countries hit an all-time high on the Human Development Index, the HDI.
Which is kind of the gold standard metric, right?
It really is. They reached an aggregate score of 0.914. And just to put that in perspective for a second, the HDI isn't just about money. It's a composite index. It measures lifespan, education levels, and a decent standard of living.
So 0.914 is, that's incredibly prestigious.
Oh, it's an apex. It represents a peak of human biological and societal achievement. But, and here's where your video game penalty comes, in the United Nations recently introduced a second metric.
The blinking icon in the corner.
Exactly. When that exact same 0.914 score is mathematically adjusted for planetary pressures, so specifically looking at carbon emissions and material footprint, it creates a new metric called the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
And what happens to the score?
Under that lens, that shiny 0.914 violently plummets to 0.741.
A drop from 0.914 to 0.741. Wait, let me just make sure the math lands for you listening, because that is an 18.9% erasure of human development value.
Almost exactly a fifth of the value, just gone.
We're basically rounding up to a 19% loss. It's the statistical equivalent of finding out that the foundation of this gleaming, state-of-the-art skyscraper you live in is actively dissolving into the groundwater beneath it.
It really forces a complete reevaluation of what we even consider progress. But, to understand how we arrived at a state of such high leverage where our development is essentially debt financed by the environment, we actually have to trace the climb itself.
Right, because we didn't just start at 0.914.
No, not at all. We have data tracking this specific group of elite nations all the way back to 1990. And looking at the baseline HDI, the unadjusted score, it is a literal monument to human persistence.
What were the numbers looking like back in 1990?
Well, in 1990, the aggregate score for these nations was 0.797, and over 3 decades, it just marches relentlessly upward. It passes 0.838 around the year 2000, hits 0.879 by 2010, and finally arrives at that peak of 0.914 in 2023.
Looking at that curve, the transition from 0.797 to a 0.914, It feels like more than just a few extra dollars in the bank. It feels like a fundamental change in how a society actually operates day to day.
Oh, it is. It's a qualitative generational shift. Moving from the high point sevens into the firm point nines means a society has moved from being highly developed into extremely developed.
And what does that actually require, mechanically speaking?
Well, think about it like this. A 0.7 might mean you have a functioning hospital in your city. A 0.9 means you have a highly specialized trauma center, you have universal access to continuous refrigeration for advanced pharmaceuticals, and you have a digitized supply chain that can deliver a very specific MRI contrast dye overnight.
Wow. Okay, so it's a massive leap in complexity.
Exactly. It represents the compounding interest of decades of localized health improvements, the complete eradication of certain preventable diseases, an infrastructure grid that practically never fails. It's the architectural blueprint of modern, frictionless prosperity.
Frictionless is a really great word for it. It means the water is safe to drink straight from the tap, the internet is fast enough to support millions of people working remotely, and, basic physical survival is no longer the primary daily concern for the vast majority of the population.
Right. The survival baseline is completely secured.
But, and I noticed this when we were prepping for the deep dive, when I look closely at the curve of that 33-year climb, that frictionless illusion completely shatters around 2020. There's a very sharp, very obvious disruption in the data.
Yeah, the plateau and the dip.
Exactly. The data shows a clear plateau in 2019 at 0.909, and then a very real drop down to 0.901 in 2020. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
We all lived through the global health and economic shocks of 2020. A massive, once-in-a-century crisis basically shut down the entire globe. So isn't the dip completely obvious? I mean, if an Olympic weightlifter drops the barbell because an earthquake hits the gymnasium, we don't blame the weightlifter, right? It's an external shock.
The trigger was absolutely external and completely unprecedented in modern times. But the significance of that drop isn't about assigning blame. It's about examining the structural integrity of the gymnasium itself.
Okay, unpack that for me.
The dip in 2020 dropping to 0.901 and really kind of continuing to stagnate into 2021 before any real recovery began, it exposes a profound vulnerability in the VHHD model. It mathematically proves that even the most hyper-advanced, incredibly wealthy nations on Earth are deeply systemically fragile.
See, I'm struggling to reconcile the word fragile with nations that possess, nuclear submarines and trillion-dollar tech companies. And they did recover to 0.914 by 2023. Doesn't that quick bounce back prove their resilience?
It proves they had the capital to rebound, sure. But the vulnerability lies in their profound dependency. The human development of these nations is entirely tethered to the uninterrupted flow of global health, these incredibly complex, just-in-time supply chains and absolute economic stability.
Wow, so they aren't insulated.
Not at all. Their high scores are not fortresses. Think about how a hyper-developed economy actually functions. It relies on microscopic chips manufactured in one hemisphere, assembled in another, and shipped globally on incredibly tight schedules. It relies on a healthcare system optimized for maximum efficiency, which, by the way, means very few empty, wasted hospital beds.
Right. Everything is optimized to the exact margin.
Exactly. So when extreme systemic pressure hits that hyper-optimized system, the data proves that decades of slow incremental gains can reverse almost overnight. Extreme development requires extreme, constant, flawless maintenance. It's an incredibly highly strung system.
That makes a lot of sense when you frame it around hyper-optimization. It's kind of like a high-performance Formula One race car. It goes incredibly fast. It's an absolute marvel of engineering. But if you get a single tiny pebble in the fuel injector, the entire engine shuts down.
Exactly.
Whereas a rusty old tractor might just grind right through it.
Yeah.
The VHHD nations are basically Formula One cars.
That's a perfect analogy. And living inside that Formula One environment fundamentally alters the human biological experience. If we pivot from the macro infrastructure stuff down to the micro reality of actually living inside this system, the data we have on life expectancy and education reveals some really stark biological truths.
Yeah, the life expectancy numbers in this report are wild. Let's look at the figures for 2023. In these highly developed nations, female life expectancy at birth reached an astonishing 82.89 years.
It's incredible.
And meanwhile, male life expectancy reached 77.20 years.
Right. So you have a very clear gap there.
A 5.69-year gap, to be exact. Nearly 6 extra years of life for women. Now, I know women generally live longer, but All 6 years seems like a massive canyon. Why is that gap so pronounced in the most developed nations? You would think advanced medicine would kind of equalize things across the board.
It's actually the exact opposite. The environment of extreme development clarifies the biological baseline.
What do you mean by clarifies?
So in environments with lower development scores, high mortality rates from external factors tend to mask underlying biological differences. When a society lacks clean water, or struggles with communicable diseases, or has high maternal mortality rates, both men and women die younger from environmental hazards.
Right, the environment is just dangerous for everyone.
Exactly. But when you create a highly developed environment with top-tier medical care, sanitation, and safety nets, you essentially mute the environmental noise.
Oh, I see. You remove the external threat, so all that's really left is the internal biology.
Precisely. You strip away the external risks, and the biological mechanisms take over. Estrogen provides natural cardiovascular protection. Women generally have stronger immune responses. And societally, men often engage in higher occupational and behavioral risks. When the society neutralizes those preventable diseases, women's natural biological advantages in longevity are maximally released.
So that 82.89 figure isn't just a medical achievement.
No, it represents a profound biological dividend that's paying out in a stabilized society.
The environment gets out of the way, and the female biological advantage just totally takes off. But when we look at the other side of the human capital coin, education, the data shows a very different, almost concerning curve.
Yeah, the education metrics are really hitting a wall.
We tracked something called expected years of schooling. For you listening, this is basically the total number of years of education a child entering the school system today can expect to receive over their lifetime. And in 2023, it hit roughly 16.9 years for females and 15.8 years for males.
Which is a huge amount of time in a classroom.
Right, but the real story here is that these numbers have slammed into a ceiling. For women, it actually peaked slightly back in 2019 at 16.96 years, and has just been on a flat plateau ever since.
And we see the exact same stagnation in mean years of schooling, which measures the actual years of education attained by adults aged 25 and older. It's sitting totally stagnant around 12.4 to 12.6 years across the board. The growth curve has just flattened out entirely.
You know, I like to think of education in these nations like leveling up in a role-playing game.
Okay, I'm with you.
Going from level 1 to level 10, say. Going from zero education to finishing middle school is relatively easy and fast. The experience points are cheap. The society just needs to build basic schoolhouses and hire general teachers. But once your character hits level 85, maxing out those final high-level stats takes an immense amount of time and resources.
The grind gets real.
Exactly, the grind. And since high school and early college are practically universal in these nations now, the metric of pure quantity is basically maxed out. What is the alternative? Keep everyone in a classroom until they are 35 years old. That would completely destroy the labor force.
The RPG analogy holds up perfectly because it really highlights the diminishing returns of simply adding more. The Human Development Index has historically relied very heavily on the quantity of education, literally just years spent sitting at a desk. But the data strongly suggests these societies have hit the structural ceiling of that specific metric.
So they can't just keep adding years to boost their HDI score.
Exactly. The future challenge for VHHD nations is not trying to squeeze out a 17th or 18th expected year of schooling. The frontier has fundamentally shifted. The struggle now is entirely about the quality and relevance of that education.
Right, because spending 16 years learning rote memorization in an era of artificial intelligence is functionally useless, even if it looks great on the United Nations scorecard.
It becomes a liability, honestly. The focus must shift to cognitive flexibility, technological literacy, and the equity of access to the highest tiers of specialized knowledge. You can't just add more time. You have to add exponentially more value to the time that's already being spent in the system.
Well, if we accept that women are maximizing this education metric, I mean, we have a full expected year of schooling more than men, 16.9 years versus 15.8, and they're living nearly 6 years longer, naturally, you would assume they are absolutely dominating the economy.
You would think so, mathematically speaking.
Right. They have more time on Earth and more time in the classroom. But when we look at the financial data in the report, that assumption completely falls apart. It is one of the most jarring disconnects in this entire data stack.
It really reveals how aggregate data can be dangerously misleading if you don't interrogate the underlying economics. So the United Nations tracks a metric called the Gender Development Index, or GDI. It compares the human development of women to the human development of men.
And a score of 1.0 would mean perfect absolute mathematical parity.
Exactly. In 2023, the GDI for these very high human development countries is 0.989.
I mean, Quote 989 sounds like a utopian achievement. It projects this image of a society that is almost perfectly equal. You read that number and think, great, we solved it. Good job, everyone. Pack it up.
It does project that until you shatter the illusion by looking specifically at the gross national income, or GNI, per capita, broken down by gender. When we separate the financial reality from the health and education scores, the utopian image collapses instantly.
Let's hit them with the numbers.
In 2023, the female GNI per capita, measured in 2021 purchasing power parity dollars, is $41,542. The male GNI per capita is $64,642.
I need to hold on to that for a second, because looking at this on behalf of you listening, it is genuinely maddening. Women are technically more educated on paper. They are living longer, healthier lives, but they are getting hit with a $23,100 deficit just for participating in the economy.
Yes. Despite the near-perfect gender development index, women in the most highly developed nations on the planet are earning roughly 64.3% of what men earn in terms of gross national income.
It's like doing 110% of the work on a complex group project. Doing all the background research, staying late to format the slides, making sure the bibliography is perfect, and then only getting 64% of the final grade. Meanwhile, the guy who just read the intro paragraph off a note card gets the A.
It's an incredibly frustrating reality.
It's a massive invisible tax on female participation. How does a highly developed society even justify a $23,000 gap? Like, mechanically, where does that money go?
Well, the causality behind that gap is deeply structural. It's not just about women being paid less for the exact same job, though, to be clear, that still happens. It is mostly about occupational segregation and the heavy penalization of caregiving.
What do you mean by penalization of caregiving?
In VHHD nations, we see a severe motherhood penalty paired with a fatherhood bonus. When women have children, their earnings trajectory often flattens or even dips. This is because they absorb the vast majority of unpaid domestic labor and childcare, which often forces them into part-time or flexible roles that simply pay less.
And the fathers.
Conversely, fathers often see an earnings bump. They are perceived by corporate structures as being more stable or in need of supporting a family, so they get promoted. Furthermore, the industries that are heavily populated by women education, nursing, care work are systemically valued less in terms of pure GDP compensation than male-dominated fields like finance, engineering, and tech.
So the system is literally designed to financially reward the things men traditionally do and financially penalize the biological and societal roles women take on, despite the fact that the society would literally collapse without nurses and teachers.
That is the absolute crux of the issue. The GDI of 0.989 is a mirage. It's heavily weighted by health and education areas where women, as we've seen, are excelling, but those high scores average out the abysmal income disparity. What this data undeniably proves is that the final, most heavily fortified fortress of gender inequality in advanced societies is no longer in the classroom.
Right.
It's no longer in the hospital ward. It is purely in the workplace, in the corporate hierarchy, and in the fundamental distribution of economic reward.
The classroom is conquered, but the boardroom is still a fortress. And this disconnect between social progress and actual power distribution leads us to another fascinating metric in the sources. It's the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Right, which looks at things from a slightly different angle.
Yeah, this metric looks at reproductive health, empowerment, and the labor market. And unlike the other scores, a lower score here means less inequality. And the macro trend here looks like a staggering victory. The GII plummeted from 0.338 back in 1990 down to an incredibly low 0.125 in 2023.
The drop is historically significant, and when we really dig into the specific indicators driving that improvement, we see phenomenal triumphs of medical science and public health policy. The most striking one is the maternal mortality ratio.
That's the number of mothers who die per 100,000 live births, right?
Correct. In 1990, that number was 30.99. By 2023, it dropped to 14.06.
They literally cut maternal mortality in half in a single generation.
No.
How does a highly developed society even accomplish that mechanically? Was it just like training better doctors?
It's much, much more complex than just individual doctors getting better. Having maternal deaths is a triumph of logistical infrastructure.
Logistics.
Absolutely. It means standardizing prenatal care across the board so that complications like preeclampsia are caught months before birth. It means building out emergency obstetric infrastructure, ensuring that if a woman hemorrhages during delivery, there is a fully stocked blood bank and an operating room ready within minutes. And crucially, it's universally accessible regardless of where she lives.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That is a massive societal effort.
It is. And similarly, the adolescent birth rate plummeted from over 36 down to just 10.1 per 1,000 women ages 15 to 19. That requires widespread, normalized access to contraception and comprehensive reproductive education. These are life-saving, society-altering victories regarding bodily autonomy and biological survival.
But, and there's always a but with this data, I'm looking at the empowerment side of that exact same GII index. Specifically, the female share of parliament seats. The people actually writing the laws and deciding the national budgets.
It's a political power metric.
Exactly. In 1990, women held just 13.69% of those seats. By 2023, that number grew to 30.22%. Now, going from roughly 13% to over 30% is a pretty steep growth curve. It more than doubled.
Is that not a massive win we should be celebrating?
It is a win, and it represents decades of relentless political organizing. However, the baseline context is critical here. A 30.22% share still leaves men holding nearly 70% of the absolute political power in these nations.
Yeah, when you put it that way, it hits different.
Right. The disparity between the medical victories and the political realities reveals a somewhat sobering truth about human societies. We are looking at the literal pinnacle of human development. Yet the data shows that securing basic biological survival, reducing mortality, and securing fundamental human rights happens exponentially faster than the secondary redistribution of entrenched political and economic power.
I'm trying to picture how that plays out in reality. Because getting a specialized maternity wing built to save mothers, that's universally agreed upon. It's a paternalistic universal good that basically no politician is going to argue against. Exactly. Everyone wants to save mothers.
But asking the men who authorized the funding for that hospital wing to give up half their seats in the legislature or half the CEO positions in the Fortune 500, that's a zero-sum game. Sharing power is much, much harder than saving lives.
That is the underlying mechanism right there. Improving maternal health does not require those in power to relinquish their status. Political parity does. Even in the most hyper-developed, technologically advanced, and nominally democratic nations on Earth, women are kept far away from the basic 50% baseline of parity in the rooms where the ultimate decisions are actually made.
The glass ceiling is still fully intact.
The technological and medical curves are exponential. The curve of relinquishing structural power is painfully, stubbornly linear.
Now, if we pull back from gender specifically and look at the entire societal pie, this idea of hidden disparities gets even more intense. This brings us to a metric that I like to think of as the bruised apple of the dataset, the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
This is where the averages really get exposed.
Yeah, we've been talking about this peak national average square of 0.914, but an average is just a mathematical smoothing tool. It paves over all the cracks. When the United Nations mathematically adjusts that 0.914 score to account for internal inequality, meaning how that health, education, and wealth is actually distributed across the real population, the score drops to 0.821.
And that drop represents an overall loss of 10.17% in human development. Over 10% of the human potential in these elite nations is essentially vaporized by internal inequality.
I want you listening to really visualize this bruised apple metaphor. Think about walking into a high-end supermarket and looking at a perfect, shiny, wax-coated apple under the bright lights. It looks absolutely flawless from the front. That is the 0.914.
Perfect specimen.
But when you pick it up and turn it around, 10% of the back is deeply bruised, soft, and rotting. That is what the IHDI represents. And the data actually breaks down exactly what that rot is made of. It's not spread evenly at all.
No, it's very concentrated. The inequality adjustment dissects the loss across 3 dimensions. The loss in development due to inequality in education is 4.95%. The loss due to inequality in health, specifically life expectancy, is 4.59%.
Which are bad, but not catastrophic.
Right. Those are significant numbers, but they are relatively contained because VHHD nations generally have universal or highly subsidized public schooling and healthcare systems. The massive glaring wound in this data is the inequality in income. The loss in development due to income inequality is an astronomical 20.11%.
20% of the income value just wiped out by disparity.
It is the absolute Achilles heel of the very high human development nations. You can mandate that every child attends school until age 16, which caps education inequality.
Yeah.
You can build advanced medical systems that keep most people alive into their 70s, which caps life expectancy inequality.
But the money.
But the economic systems in these countries are structured to allow for an almost limitless concentration of wealth at the very top. Meanwhile, the bottom percentiles struggle to access even a fraction of that prosperity.
I want you to think about your own city right now. If you live in one of these highly developed countries, you can probably picture this central financial district. You know, the area of the glass skyscrapers, the luxury boutiques, the Michelin star restaurants with waiting lists, the people walking around in suits that literally cost more than a car.
Right, the absolute peak of extreme development.
That is the extreme development. But if you take the immense wealth of that specific zip code and mathematically average it with the daily struggles of the poorest neighborhoods, just a 20-minute drive away, the areas dealing with underfunded public transit, severe housing crises, and gig economy workers stringing together 3 jobs just to buy groceries, you create a mathematical fiction.
It's an illusion of shared success.
A high national average mathematically masks the localized suffering of the bottom percentile. That 20% loss due to income inequality proves that the prosperity we are celebrating is being hoarded, not shared.
It completely validates the widespread cognitive dissonance we see in modern societies today. People read headlines claiming their country's GDP is breaking records, or the stock market is at an all-time high, or the Human Development Index is peaking, but they don't feel it in their bank accounts.
No, they feel broke.
Exactly. Their rent is unaffordable, and their wages are completely stagnant. The IHEI data proves they aren't crazy. The wealth exists, the extreme development is real, but a fifth of its potential societal impact is locked securely behind the gates of income inequality.
It is a profound, sobering reality check. We have built this incredible machine, but only a fraction of the passengers get to sit in first class while the rest are down below shoveling coal. But honestly, as shocking as that 20% income inequality bruise is, it is just a prelude to the existential threat hidden in our final major data set.
The big reveal.
Yeah, this is the plot twist we hinted at in the very beginning with the blinking stamina bar. Let's return to the PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
We really need to revisit that core tension. The standard triumphant HDI is 0.914. But when adjusted for planetary pressures, it shrinks by 18.9% down to 0.741. This metric specifically adjusts the Human Development Score by penalizing nations based on 2 crucial environmental factors: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita.
I want to focus on the raw numbers for these highly developed nations because they're absolutely brutal. In 2023, the per capita carbon dioxide emissions are 9.44 tons per person.
Which is a massive volume of emissions.
And the material footprint, which is a fascinating metric to me, hovers near 23 tons per capita. Before we even analyze the trend on that, could you just explain what a material footprint actually measures? How does a single person account for 23 tons of material? I certainly don't throw away 23 tons of garbage a year.
The material footprint is insidious specifically because it is largely invisible to the consumer. It measures the total amount of raw materials abstracted globally to meet the final consumption demands of a country divided by its population. It is not just your household trash.
Okay, so what is it?
It's the thousands of pounds of concrete poured to build the highway you commute on every day. It's the rare earth metals violently mined in another country to build the smartphone in your pocket. It's the immense volume of water and agricultural land used to grow the cotton for a fast fashion t-shirt that you might wear 3 times before discarding. It tracks the physical weight of a high-consumption lifestyle, regardless of where on Earth the extraction actually happened.
So even if a VHD country claims their local cities are incredibly clean and green and they have great recycling programs, they might just be outsourcing the dirty extraction to poorer nations. And this metric forces them to own that weight.
Precisely the dynamic the PHDI exposes. And looking at the historic data, that material footprint of roughly 23 tons has barely shifted since 1990.
Wait, really? Since 1990?
Barely budged. We have known about the catastrophic realities of climate change for over 30 years. We have had endless global summits. Yet our baseline material consumption has not changed.
This completely flips the traditional narrative of what development actually means. Traditionally, the global narrative is that the poorest, least developed nations need to catch up to the VHHD nations. We present ourselves as the finish line.
The role models of the world.
Exactly. But by the PHDI metrics, the wealthiest and most technologically developed nations are actually the ones doing the most violent, disproportionate damage to the planetary systems that sustain biological life. The data shows that despite decades of marketing campaigns about green energy, recycling, and sustainable growth, technological efficiency has not saved us. We've simply used greater efficiency to consume more total materials.
It's the classic trap.
Like, our LED lights use 90% less power than incandescent bulbs, so instead of saving energy, we just build screens that are 10 times larger and leave them on all day.
You are describing the Jevons paradox perfectly. Increased efficiency leads to increased consumption. The PHDI data proves that the VHHD model of development is fundamentally decoupled from ecological reality. We aren't just highly developed, we are highly leveraged.
It's like finding out your friend, who drives a pristine sports car, lives in a massive mansion, and constantly posts vacation photos from Dubai, is actually funding his entire lifestyle on a dozen maxed-out high-interest credit cards.
A total house of cards.
Yeah. From the outside, it looks like an incredible standard of living. It's the envy of the neighborhood. But it's an illusion of independent wealth. We haven't earned an HDI score of 0.914. We are borrowing it from the Earth's future, and the interest is compounding in the atmosphere.
The 0.914 is entirely a debt-financed standard of living. And this ecological deficit leads to a really fascinating statistical anomaly when we look at how nations compare to one another globally. We can see exactly how this ecological debt penalizes the VHHD nations on the world stage.
Oh, the global rankings. Yeah, let's talk about that. When we look at the standard HDI global rankings, not the one just measuring health, wealth, and education, the aggregate of these VHHD countries sits comfortably around rank 32 out of 203 evaluated nations.
So they are safely in the upper echelon.
Right. But when you switch to the PHDI rankings, the environmentally adjusted one, they drop to rank 35. Now, at first glance, dropping from 32 to 35 doesn't sound like a catastrophic fall. It's just 3 spots. But there is a mathematical catch hidden in the denominator here, isn't there?
Yes, the statistical nuance completely changes the meaning of that drop. The standard HDI ranks 203 countries. But the pool of countries measured in the PHDI ranking is much smaller. It only evaluates 166 countries, likely due to data availability on things like material footprints. So dropping from rank 32 down to 35 within a significantly smaller pool of competitors means the VHHD group is mathematically lagging much further behind when ecology is actually factored in.
I see the math now. It's like finishing 32nd in a marathon that has 200 people in it. That's a great percentile. You are near the front, but then you run a different race with only 160 people, and you finish 35th. You're relatively much closer to the middle of the pack. You performed worse against a smaller field.
Exactly. Their ecological deficit acts as a massive anchor. It proves that nations with vast financial resources, advanced technologies, and highly educated populations are fundamentally failing to translate those immense advantages into sustainable living practices. In many cases, they are being outperformed ecologically by nations with far fewer resources. The very high human development tier is, ironically, the tier most desperately in need of radical systemic reform if human development is to survive the 21st century.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, analyzing the very architecture of modern prosperity. Let's distill this down to the core truths for everyone listening. We've been looking at the ultimate global success story, and we found 3 massive, undeniable pillars of tension hidden inside the data. First, we have the inertia of growth.
Right, the stalling engine.
We are at record HDI highs, 0.914, but the speed of progress is hitting a brick wall. We saw it in the extreme fragility of the 2020 drop, where external shocks wiped out years of gains almost instantly. And we see it in the plateau of education years. We can't just keep adding raw quantity. We have to figure out how to generate qualitative value.
Second, we uncovered the disconnect in distribution. The prosperity undeniably exists, but it is aggressively hoarded. We saw the illusion of gender parity shattered by a $23,100 income deficit for women, which proves the corporate workplace is the final, heavily guarded fortress of inequality.
You know, the bruised apple.
And the bruised apple of the IHDI, where 20% of human development potential is vaporized simply due to structural income inequality. The high national averages deliberately hide the struggle at the bottom.
And finally, we have the ecological debt. The massive 19% penalty when we adjust for planetary pressures. The staggering 23 tons of material footprint hanging around the neck of every single person in these nations. It proves that our current definition of success is quite literally a planetary liability.
The synthesis of all this data necessitates a profound paradigm shift. Moving forward, the label of very high human development can no longer just be an economic high score. It cannot simply be about extending lifespans, increasing GDP, and accumulating more years in a classroom.
It has to mean more than that.
The definition of development itself must evolve into a measure of harmony. Harmony between different strata of humans, eliminating those massive income and gender gaps, and harmony between humanity and the earth. The only future development that matters, the only development that will actually survive, is green, equitable development.
It really makes you wonder what the actual end game is here. For the last 33 years, from 1990 to 2023, development has always meant having more. More years sitting in a school desk, more income per capita, more material goods, more years added to our lifespan. It's a philosophy built entirely on endless addition.
Just constant accumulation.
But looking at that massive 19% ecological bill coming due, that hidden penalty draining our score, we have to ask ourselves a genuinely uncomfortable question, one that challenges the very core of how we live. Will the true mark of a highly developed society in the 21st century actually be learning how to thrive, how to be happy and healthy, while radically consuming less? You are sitting on the couch with the ultimate high score, but the stamina bar is blinking red. It might be time to figure out how to play a completely different game.